We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to WiiL2B Podcast with your host.
It's me, Yifa.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining WiiL2B Podcast. This evening is going to be a little bit different than it has been in the past 7 episodes. We are going to be having a watch party, and joining me today are Kelly, Brenda, and Jamel. And we are going to be watching a pre-recorded video with Paul Wilson, who is my guest for this evening. Unfortunately, Paul and I had a miscommunication of the timing. So I have talked about this before, but everybody needs to have a backup plan and people who are in your pocket, your board of directors that help you figure things out. So I reached in my back pocket, I talked to my board of directors, and we got a pre-recorded version of the podcast. So I am going to be now starting the podcast. Kelly, Brenda, and Jamel and I are going to be watching. And then at the end, we're going to have a little conversation about what we thought of the conversation and podcast between Paul and I. So here we go, everyone. Podcast episode. So this evening, we have a really interesting podcast episode because we had a conflict of time. And so we are pre-recording this podcast, and also I will be airing it live. What's so important about this and why I'm so excited about this is because this podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, their will and desire to do extraordinary things, and how they overcome any kind of obstacles that prevent them from doing these extraordinary things. And this was a major obstacle. Last night, getting the call that, wait a second, I can't do it at the time you're supposed to be airing. I was like, ah. But as I said in a previous episode, everyone should have a board of directors in their back pocket. And I called one of my board members and said, hey, what should I do here? And Paul Wilson was great at helping me to figure it out, along with Lorma Rackley, who is one of my board members. And here we are right now. Paul Wilson has a noteworthy career in the beauty industry as a leader, an innovator, a major influencer. He is the global artistic director for American Crew, a curriculum creator, a hairstylist, behind the chair and presenting on stage. He's head educator and co-owner of Art and Science, which is a $6 million earning salon. He's a husband and a father. In just over a decade, he sold his salon. He bought it back, rebranded, won awards, lost a business partner, gained a business partner, dealt with multiple employee walkouts, accusations of racist employment practices, and during the pandemic experienced a 3-month shutdown. And I got an email last night from Paul's wife to remind me that he also had a burst appendix on his 51st birthday and almost didn't make it. So I want to add that in there. I mean, what a decade. I mean, what an amazing decade that you've had. And I'm so happy to have you on my podcast because I think that your story is important and all of the things that you've overcome are really important. So thank you for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure and my honor. And I think I told you when you had initially invited me that I didn't feel worthy. I was like, what, you're joking, right? I mean, but now that you've listed all that, it's like, oh yeah, I guess there's something to do on there.
You're like, I do fit in there. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
so
excited.
Paul and I have a long history. We go back 11 years, and it's amazing because I actually found Paul through a former salon that I was working for. She trained me in the American Crew way. And I was so excited about this concept of cutting men's hair. And I had this dream to work with American Crew. And all I was doing was looking through books, and I was like, oh, I love this. This is so good. And she would teach me, and I was like, oh, this is so amazing. And then I had the opportunity to take a class at a beauty conference. And Paul Wilson happened to be the educator. I didn't even know who he was. And I thought, man, this guy is so talented. One of the things that I love about you is your intuitive cutting. It's very artistic and intuitive. And that was what drew me in, because as an artist myself, I do things very intuitively, and that's important for me. So I was like, I need to have that. I need to be that. I need to do that. And I approached you and I said, hey, do you have any openings at your salon?
And I was thrilled to have you. I mean, you what you did at the salon, the career you built, just getting to work with you and build a relationship with you was just extraordinary. So thank you. I'm glad we got to have that experience.
So I know a little bit about your history, about where you came from, but my viewers don't. Can you tell me a little bit about your family history, your family dynamics? I think all of our family dynamics sort of inform who we are today. It's a part of our journey, and I'm curious about yours.
Certainly. I come from a Japanese mom. She was born in Japan. She met my dad. He was stationed in her town of Fukuoka in Japan, and they married and moved to the States. And so I was born in Denver, Colorado, and raised in a household that felt like a Japanese shrine. It took my mom a while to sort of adjust to American culture. So over the years, it started to feel less like we were living in Japan in our house. But I loved that part of it. I have great memories of the customs and just the way that it was set up and what and how we ate. All of that was just incredible. But then my parents split. I also have a little brother that's 2 years younger than I am, and my dad remarried, and the woman that he married, she's Serbian and amazing. She was in college administration all of her life, and she essentially was the one that kind of brought the family together and kind of. I think is essentially, taught a lot of, my brother and myself, we learned so much about life and leadership and how to live from her, as well as my dad. My dad just had this amazing outlook on life and just a spirit that I think that we both were inspired by. And that's kind of how things started for myself.
So I just want to clarify, you're saying that when your parents split, your stepmother was sort of the one that stepped in a motherly type of role. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, because we really spent most of our time with my dad and his new wife, my stepmom. I think my mom, we had such limited time with her, so she became, so she was, so and again, being Japanese and being, we weren't, she's an amazing woman, but in terms of what we learned about life and sort of being raised by somebody, it really was my stepmom that showed us the ropes. Yeah.
What do you remember about the Japanese shrine, so to speak? Like, what was that like? It felt amazing to be in that space and be part of, the kind of all the cultural elements that she brought to the table. Because I feel like I recognized it at an early age, because, when I go to other people's homes, it was nothing like ours. So I knew we were very different. Like that's the first time that I was like, okay, we're different. This is not your typical thing that you have, where I'm living. So, I don't know. I feel like I celebrated that and, cherished it. I wasn't scared of it or ashamed of it. I was proud of it. Yeah.
Even at an early age.
But it must be, looking back at that, I mean, just from an outsider, and also comparing my daughter's situation, she repatriated to Austria. Mm-hmm. And, she grew up here, so she speaks English and she has very Americanized ways. And while she's there, she's saying to me, I realize now why immigrants can become so isolated, because it's really difficult, especially like being an American, everyone wants to speak English to you. So she's not really forced to speak German.
Sure.
And it's easier to find friends that, speak English. And if you're here in America, it's easier to find people that, speak your common language if you're, Spanish speaking or Japanese speaking, or to become isolated if you can't find that and you're unsure of how to come into the dominant culture's norms. And I can imagine, looking from the outside in, how your mom must have felt, coming from her native country into America and not having, Yana's taking classes, and
Mm-hmm.
she's gonna actually, she's like, I think I need to hire a speech coach, someone that can help me perfect my German, and maybe even like an acting coach so that I can have some, when you speak in another language, you have certain, nuances and things that you do. We think of Italians as doing this. And I can just, imagine 50 something years ago, what that was like and not having the access.
Yes. I, it's funny, as I've, anyone that I meet, even currently that is Japanese, they see that I have, that I honor the culture. They just said just the my mannerisms and the way that I interact with them. They can see it. They know that I've had exposure to it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think for my mom, one of the things that was hard for her is that coming from such a disciplined culture.
Yes.
And then coming to the U.S. and then my dad was not a military man. I mean, he enrolled, he enlisted just to because he needed to, right? But he was a hippie at heart. And, so for her to get dragged to the U.S. and then have my dad, with his open lifestyle, his open state of mind,
right?
So she ended up remarrying an ex-military sergeant and just thrived. They had an amazing life, and she was so happy, and so and then it's her life kind of made much more sense to her, I think, when she remarried. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess for you, and you have 3 siblings, 2 a brother also from your mother and father, and then a stepbrother.
Yep.
How was it for are any of you more linear thinking than your like your mother? Because I know you, and you're very easygoing, and I think of Colorado when I think of you. That kind of lifestyle.
That's interesting. I think my brother Bob, that's just 2 years younger. He maybe has a little bit more of a linear thing, but honestly, I think we really took our view of the world from my dad. Because even my little brother that's in Pittsburgh, that my half brother, is really you would know that we were all raised by the same father.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how does that inform where you are today? You have so many successes and awards, and you're an entrepreneur. And how did being raised by your father and your stepmother give you this thing that you have to be able to accomplish so much? Or do you think it was just in yourself?
That's interesting, because the overarching theme of your podcast really is a nature versus nurture, philosophy. And it's a really great question, and something I ask myself all the time, because my dad was so, he was very open-minded, very big spirit, big personality, always happy, and that gave us a sort of this overall view of the world. But it was really my stepmom that sort of taught all of us how to be leaders and how to engage with life in that way. So I really, and honestly, I think even my mom, my real mom, I think she had some of that sort of inner discipline and drive. She was a very spirited, intense woman, for sure. Even though Japanese, yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you get these things from maybe your stepmother, and a little bit from your mother. and you initially were thinking about going into becoming a commercial artist. And what exactly do you mean by commercial artist?
Well, that was sort of a bailout on my behalf because my brother and I grew up just drawing. We just drew, comic books and superheroes, and I think we drew 1,000 pictures of Kiss, the rock band. Just like we would just hold ourselves up and just sketch, and we had just endless piles of sketches. So, I loved comic books. So I just, my whole life, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I went to comic book conventions, met all my favorite artists, and, I'd show my work. And so it just felt like that was my path. And then as I was approaching, kind of the end of high school, I started feeling very nervous about that as a career choice. I just felt like, I felt like it was limiting in some way or challenging to, really sort of achieve a level of success. I don't know. There was just something that just said, that's not my thing.
Yeah.
So I just felt like, well, I met like somebody that was in commercial art, through my aunt. We did a little, day trip to her agency.
Okay.
Met this guy, so he was drawing and painting, but this was in the early 80s that we had that, so by the time I'm graduating high school in the late 80s, it was clear that computers were, it was drawing and painting your way through a commercial art career was a thing of the past. So, it just was timely because I met, this hairdresser. I went to my stepmom's hairdresser, and this man enlightened me to this industry. So, and he sold me on it. He just went through 1,000 reasons why I should be a hairdresser. So by the end of the haircut, I had no choice but to step into that, I mean, I hadn't even thought of it as a career choice, but that's kind of where it started for me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I never thought of it as a career choice either. I come from a family of, lawyers and doctors and professionals and journalists and, white collar working people. However, going back in my history, my great grandfather was a barber. And we think today, hairdresser, barber, it's talked about as sort of like, and you think of Grease, the movie, as like, oh, this is a kind of a high school dropout type of thing. It's not a career where you can have success and awards and have a $6 million salon. And, it's not something that you think about. My great grandfather wasn't just a barber. He was a landowner. He and my grandmother were sort of like the banking institution, because back then, Black people couldn't go to the white bank most often and get loans. So they would loan people money. And my aunt found these incredible ledgers of, detailed, the person borrowed this much and then they were paying it back, slowly over time. And so being a barber or being a hairdresser isn't necessarily a dropout type of career. Tell me a little bit about what that means to you when you hear people saying that kind of thing, or looking at you when you say, oh, I'm a hairdresser, and they kind of are like,
Yeah, because that's still a stigma, right? I mean, that's still, it's been such an amazing career, and I love the industry and I love the craft so much. And it's just, you and I have seen such an amazing side of it that maybe it's not for everybody, but it's just been so incredible in terms of satisfying the creative side of me and being able to impact people and build relationships. So I try to do everything I can to educate people on why this is such an amazing industry, so that if somebody looks down on it or thinks less of it, that I try to open their mind a little bit.
What is this phrase to you? When I was going through my early years of hairdressing, I was always hearing this phrase, hairdressers are daymakers. What does that mean to you?
I really think it comes back to like the impact that what we do, right? The art that we're crafting has such an impact on how people feel. And I think that when you call it people daymakers, I think that's really where it stems. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, that's the reason that this is such an amazing industry, and why, this hairdresser that I met was so adamant that I should be a hairdresser, is because he knew that I would be so satisfied by impacting people in that way, having our art make people have this intrinsic feeling about themselves.
Yeah, it is truly amazing. I mean, you think of like, I know oftentimes people compare us to bartenders in some ways because people spill all their guts to us, they tell us everything and we hold that secret, we hold that sacred. We keep that to us and we're not telling everyone's business, but it is really powerful that we are an industry where people can feel safe and comfortable to talk to us about their lives. And in some ways we're helpful, we're not therapists per se, but most people who come into this industry are intuitive in that way, I believe.
Yes. And those are the ones that really make a profound impact. I mean, even some of them aren't even great hairdressers, but they are. They own the salon psychology aspect of it so well and build relationships and connect with people that's how they are successful. Yeah.
Right.
So if you can do all of that, then come on.
Right. Sometimes you don't even have to be the top, hairstylist. You can just be an average hairstylist, but it's that stuff that you're doing, with your client and that love and care that you give that makes people want to keep coming to you. Yeah. It's also funny because hairstylists, have these sort of caricatures that they, other people look at them and they say, oh, I can tell that's a Paul Wilson haircut or the Paul Wilson client. You create these nuances about who you are and what you are creating in what kind of client you want to have. What was that like for you? How did you determine the kind of client you wanted to sort of have in your chair and the kind of look you wanted to create? Is that still evolving?
It is still evolving. When you're doing hair, trends change and things evolve in the industry, just from a craft and kind of what's relevant and the hair side of it. But it's interesting because who you are draws a certain person. It just does. You end up sort of having this clientele that are people that you connect with and that you build relationships with. But in terms of, I feel like it was twofold. It was the integrity of the work, right? I loved what I did just from a craft standpoint, and I wanted to hone my own sort of qualities in terms of, I knew what I liked. I knew what I liked and what I didn't like. I appreciated all of the geometry and architecture of Sassoon, but I wanted to bring more texture and movement and build shapes a little bit differently, and I think that spoke to a lot of people, and that combined with just sort of the personal connection you make is really what it's all about. So
when we work together, oftentimes when you weren't available, I would get some of your clients, for like little, cleanups or whatever. And I'd always think, wow, I feel so blessed that they feel like I'm, worthy enough to, help in the interim between, Paul being unavailable. And to me, it spoke to having been taught by you. And some of the things that you hold valuable, I also hold valuable. Even from before, like I am more of a think outside of the box, and I like movement and I like texture. And then being taught by you as an educator, that made those things okay, in a different realm that they would have maybe said, no, stay in these lines, color in the lines instead of break the mold.
Yeah.
And I'm very much of a break the mold person. So it was, I love that because it speaks to a sense of belonging. I'm getting emotional. Oh.
I am too. Honestly, to hear this, I'm just like, wow, I can't believe that, that I impacted you in that way, because I've just loved your work. And I think that my clients, because we sat and they could see you work, and they just knew that you were the person to go to, so it's just, I think that they connect, and I don't know, you had sort of this intuitive connection with my clients, and you ended up having conversations with them all the time. And so I think I think you invited them in that way too. So yeah, no, that means so much to think that, what I do or how I do it impacted you. So thank you
I
for
think
that.
this is a good way to talk about belonging, because that for me helped me in this industry, feeling like I had a place and feeling like I belonged in my who I am, like my values that I have about, thinking outside the box and movement and and being intuitive in my craft, which I'm translating into my, people who are following my podcast and and my friends know that I'm moving more towards into a fine art practice, and it's still what I'm doing. I'm thinking intuitively, and that helped me to feel comfortable in the business of hair. And recently you had in your company, and while I was there, some upheaval because people said we don't feel belonging, we don't feel that we're heard. And I wonder how that felt for you, hearing that, because I think, as a person, you are, like I said, I think you think you're a kind person and you're a generous person and you're very empathic. And so I think I would love to hear how that felt for you, hearing that, people didn't feel belonging.
Yeah, that was without a doubt the moment in my life that I'll never forget. That's what one of the moments that you will never forget how you felt, because it was so hurtful, and it just to the very core of my being. It took me somewhere I've just never ever been. And so yeah, that initial, I think about that initial feeling of just the pain that had, which was followed interestingly by anger, because it's just I to be accused and have some of those things being said about me when I know that's not who I am.
I just
angry.
didn't mention what the accusations were.
Sure. Yeah.
To clarify, I just realized as you're talking, it's really, powerful what you're saying, but I didn't mention that you were accused of having racist practices proliferating in your salon. And I'm not sure if even you were called a racist, but I think from what I've heard, people were mentioning and saying.
Yeah, there were some social media posts that sort of, were not sort of suggested, was literally suggesting it, that's what was going on. And so that defensive, angry position, when you really think about it, and I hope that a lot of people have maybe a similar experience in terms of working with all of that I have, because what happened was, you go from this, if you really open up and actually listen to what people are saying, you actually put yourself in their shoes and you hear what you listen, then you realize that, wow, we were not who I thought we were, because I feel like the way that we built our company and the open-mindedness that we always had, that was great. I mean, we had people of multiple cultures and LGBTQ, we had a really diverse mix of people working within the company, but that alone does not mean that right? I mean,
yes,
all the things that you're confronted with suddenly, the white privilege and the silencing that was happening within the culture, and some of the things that had happened, direct situations that had happened between, say, clients and staff that I'm hearing about. It just it was sort of multi-level. So it wasn't just like one thing that happened. It was several things, and sort of kind of I mean, there were some policies and ways we operated that where we weren't building anything looking at it from that perspective, and that's what was really powerful, and that's what we realized and sent us on probably the most impactful journey that we've ever been on, and I feel like we're just starting that. but it feels incredible because we need to be on this journey. Everybody does. So, to sort of be awakened so dramatically, as hurtful and painful as it was, I mean, it needed to happen. So,
do you look at other people and their responses and see that people get stuck in that guilt or that anger, and they're not able to move past, that? I personally, I can understand it. I'm working with myself when I'm feeling like angry or guilty or something, to not sit in that and then just, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel that. So I stay there and don't, deal with the situation. Don't confront
Right.
the situation. And I'm just wondering what it feels like to you when you see other people being stuck in that, or you see in the media,
Yeah.
people being stuck in that.
Yeah.
I just got a post that said that, in Texas, they have made it now that it is not required to teach history about the civil rights or about women's suffrage. Specifically, Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King are removed from being taught. And I just, it's baffling. And it just harkens back to, maybe is it, we don't want to confront the guilt. We don't want to feel sad. We don't want to feel angry. I'm just wondering what that looks like to you when you see things like that.
Yeah, it's disheartening to the deepest level, because it's such a massive step backward, and we're at a point just culturally, right, where we have this opportunity to move forward. So clearly, there's just a state of mind out there that's not ready to do that, and unfortunately, that's a lot of the leadership, in various areas, particularly, and that's a perfect example of it. And so it's yeah. That's the thing, it's one thing to sort of come to the realization and sort of be in that space, but then what do you do with it?
Right.
I decided as individually, Susan, our company, we're going to step into this and eradicate everything that was wrong with our organization, and the way that we did things. That's the first step, but it's going to be an ongoing process. And when I think about community activism and with some of the civil leadership that have been on your podcast, that's inspiring. That's what we would love to do, but first and foremost, we need to fix our culture internally.
Yeah. And how has that been for I think after I quit working, and I think it's 2 days after, and we ran into each other, which to me it's like, okay, that was so like kismet. That was so like perfect, and I was saying, like, it's probably good, in some ways, that people like me left, because it then allows the idea that people, when they're hurting and they feel anger, and then to have them going through the healing process while you're going through the healing process, and then new people coming in, and the anger from the old people, it's almost like a ticking time bomb in a way.
Yes.
And even though it's so hurtful that so many, like 16 people left, or I think that's the number that I've heard through the grapevine. Mm-hmm. In some ways, it's like, okay, let's clean house. Let's start from the beginning. And I know that that's like shocking, because obviously revenue and losing that. What was that like for you when I said that, and also experiencing it?
Well, yes. You are correct. There is a cleansing of everything, right? And we have been cleansed. So we have this opportunity to rebuild in a really healthy way, which we are in process of doing. I would much rather have been able to do this with you together, but at Life Paths, I know that, impacted a lot of your decision making. So I can't dwell on that or wish that you were still in the salon, which I do, but that's just my reality and our reality. So, the changes that we've made internally, I think are giving us a really great sort of ground to grow from.
What changes, are you making that you can share?
Well, let's see. I guess the thing that's really been the most impactful, and Ismaelis Nunez and Alicia Wertaski that we're working with, who are DEI consultants on the surface, but at the core, I mean, they are life coaches on the deepest level, and they have obviously been, so helpful, kind of diagnosing everything that we've gone through and helping us, work with it and through it, and just opening our minds, and just the conversations that we've had, and the way that they work with us, because they work with Susan and I individually, they work with our management team, and then they also work with the entire staff. So it's and the conversations that are had, it's just people have been able to conquer fear, or take on fear, which I think is ultimately what drives people to, when you mentioned Texas, that's all fear-based, right? So
right.
to step into that with them and have them sort of help guide that process has been unbelievable. So we worked with them for the last year, and we're going to continue working with them because it's been that impactful, and we know that this is not something that you just fix. It's not this destination you get to and you're okay, we're good. Let's
Right.
So yeah.
What kind of activities do they do to help you sort of connect to that fear and like?
Yeah, really amazing. Like, the first thing they wanted to do was delve into identity, right, and get people to understand what their own identity was, and then be able to connect with people's differences, the things that are different about their identity. So it's actually the first time that I had really dug into the fact that I'm half Japanese, and that and they challenged me to sort of step into what that meant and how that's impacted my life, and and with everything with Asian hate that's going on, there was that I don't know, there was a connection to and an acknowledgement of all of that was really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they did that they really did that with everyone in the company as well, the management team. And
so it's interesting. Jessica and I, as you know, I have a DEI consulting firm, and we also do that with our in our workshops, is really having people, because we notice, even we talk about America as a melting pot, mm-hmm. and it's sort of like just come in and swirl in that soup, but you lose, oftentimes immigrants come in and they want to say, we're going to be American. Don't connect to your language anymore. We're not speaking our language. We're not doing these things. We're just going to be American. And that gets lost. The pride in who you are gets lost. And it's like, now just be an American. And then when you look at other people who aren't falling into that mold, you're like, wait, that's confusing. You need to, fall in line, And I think it's important to recognize, where you come from, who are your ancestors, and how does that inform, how people see you and who you are, and then taking pride in that. And then you can see and share other people's pride in who they are and who their ancestors are. And I think that's a really good exercise in and growth.
Mm-hmm. And I love how they get us together and they have us head into breakout sessions and really kind of dig into that, just randomly. So, you don't know if you're going to be talking to one person that maybe it's a new apprentice that I don't know well, or maybe it's, a manager I've been working with, and it's been incredible.
Yes.
Just that part of it, and then,
the vulnerability, that's
mm-hmm.
what, is so impactful. I also was trained as a racial healing facilitator, and we do those breakouts in, racial healing circles, and we practice in those like active listening. And so that you are not in judgment of what am I going to say next. That's a very Americanized, way, is like, you're supposed to be like listening to contribute to the conversation, listening to, add to what the person is saying, or debate with what the person is saying. And it's a switch to just listen without doing any of that, just to hear them, just to see them, and be in that space, not thinking, oh, I should answer that, or, oh, I should say something.
Yeah.
And then it's also for the other person who's talking to be able to be vulnerable, knowing that they're not going to be judged by what the other person is going to say or is thinking, but just to be free to just say, to talk about whatever the subject is. And I think it's super powerful, and it can, I think, unite people who have not been united, because in that way, I feel that you find connection. You find a way where it's like, oh yeah, my grandmother kind of did that, or, you know, my mother did that, or, you know, wow, that's, you know, something that I can relate to. And without that vulnerability and without connecting to yourself, it's hard to get there.
Right. And then it's hard to step in and actually put yourself in someone else's shoes if you haven't connected with that aspect of it. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And then, yeah, so they've been very engaged with that, you know, really that active listening, like being able to put yourself there, which has been a great lesson.
What is it like for you growing up in a household where your dad is white and you're a white American, and your stepmother is a Serbian European woman, and the reflection, I don't know, do you see yourself as looking Asian, or do you see yourself as a white man?
You know, I this is one of the things that they forced me to kind of, you know, determine, like, what does it really mean? And I guess I've always sort of acknowledged that I'm Japanese, and I feel the most connection to the Japanese side of me when it comes to my creativity. And I don't know, you know, well, I guess it probably comes from my mom, because she's an amazing painter. Oh. And I think that my brother and I got our artistic skills from her. I mean, she was just this natural, incredible artist. So I guess maybe through that, you know, everything that's creative about me, I've attached to being Japanese, and, you know, but every other aspect is white. You know, I'm a white man, and, you know, the white privilege piece is something that is predominantly what I live with. Very little, you know, I just haven't experienced, you know, any particular racist, you know, I just haven't had those experiences that have impacted me in any major way. I had to really kind of dig deep on that one, you know, which, you know, on some level I'm grateful for, but in some ways I'm guilty of, you know, or guilty for, you know, so it's an interesting thing. But
I think it's quite normal, you know, when I think about biracial people or multiracial people who present as a white person, or ambiguously enough that they could fall into the white category, and then have sort of white normative behaviors that you might not experience the side of you that is not white.
Right.
And Yana was saying, actually, in Europe, people don't look at her as being a Black woman. And it's odd to her, because, like, one time somebody came up to her and, like, grabbed her hair, like touched her hair, and she was like, "Don't you know you're not supposed to touch a Black woman's hair?" And they're like, "You're Black?" That was like the first question, not like anything about the hair, but like,
right.
Black. And so I think, you know, it's interesting, because if you are presenting in a way and you're growing up in a family where all of those norms are white based, you wouldn't necessarily have that. I watched, you know, Jada Pinkett Smith has the Red Table Talk. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
She has this really great kind of like something like a forum like this podcast, but it's more sort of an Oprah style thing. So the camera is panned around everyone, and it's centered around a red round table, and it's called Red Table Talk. And she interviewed a Black woman who had been adopted by a white family in a town where she was pretty much the only Black person. And she's now helping transracial adoptees and adopters to mitigate what that feels like. And what she said, however, is that because she has all these white norms, she feels most comfortable in white society. However, she does, because her face is presenting as Black and her, her body presents as Black, she does get, people wanting to, touch her hair or, racist comments or microaggressions. And I think feels like it's a little bit different for someone who is racially ambiguous or presenting white passing. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to be, I mean, I go back to this idea that, I feel guilty because I feel like I should have experienced discrimination on some level, in some way, and I never have. And that's the part that, I've really sort of, I guess acknowledged through this last year is the idea that, anyone of mixed race is going to have vastly different experiences, and most people are going to experience that, discrimination in that realm, and I just never have. So yeah, being attached to the white side of my culture has just been, pervasive.
What about your brother from your mother? I met him one time and I felt like he presents a little bit more Asian looking. Am I wrong?
Perhaps. No, perhaps I don't, but again, I mean, we've talked about this, and I don't, he also has never experienced or had any, he's not, I mean, I think he identifies very similarly to how I do, and has had very similar experiences.
Maybe it could be a combination of how you move through the world. There's a book that was written by a man who was of Creole descent. Mm-hmm. And his family was white passing, but they didn't pass. They passed for work. They passed to go into white society and get work, and then they would come back into Black society. And he didn't like this idea of not having privilege. So he passed. Once he got of age, he completely passed. He left his family behind and never went back to contact them, married a Swedish woman, and their children came out, blonde as children. Obviously, most people who are blonde end up getting darker as they age, but they were primarily blonde, but they never knew about their father's background. And the daughter ends up writing a book about this and trying to trace back her family. And she talks about how her dad did all these things to prevent anyone from knowing. Like, when people would talk about his hair, because he looked white, but his hair was sort of a little textured. Mm-hmm. And so then he would never lead on to where it was from, but people just assumed he was Jewish, let's say. They hearkened him to being Jewish. And for him, it was more important to present sort of like this white, man, but he lost his identity. And she forever then was trying to find out who she is. Where did she come from? She felt that lost identity that, your consultants are sort of mm-hmm. talking about. And I just think that's interesting that you can really almost change yourself, and then the next generation has no idea anything about it. They just feel white. Right.
Well, and it's like that's why giving my son a Japanese middle name was important to us. We wanted to, in whatever way we could keep him because he's a quarter Japanese, so it seemed it was appropriate.
Yeah.
He only got to meet my mom once before she passed, so yeah, he won't get to know her, but yeah.
How do you push through all of these tumultuous situations that you've gone through? Talk about the burst appendix on your 51st birthday, and a major shutdown of your income, your business for 3 months, and then a constricted income because you couldn't have as many people coming into the salon, and not many people were coming actually anyway because it's a pandemic, and you had a buyout and a buy-in and a partner who left, a partner who came in. I mean, so many things happened to you in a decade, which is when you think about it, it's almost like one tragedy a year.
Yeah. And most of those happened in a pretty finite period of time,
Right.
And what's interesting is through the years as art and science has grown, it's felt so stable, right? We had everything, everything was sort of on this upward trajectory, and then suddenly, we have this moment in time where it just feels like everything sort of crumbled, and we're having to sort of rebuild. I mean, my own state of mind, I've always been a very positive person, and I tend not to sort of dwell in the past and have this innate ability to kind of move forward. I think that's probably a combination of things that I learned from my dad and my stepmom. But it's something I'm grateful for, because I don't know, I just have a positive outlook and an ability to move forward. Right. And that's, I think, been the primary thing that's gotten us through this. And we've done it collectively.
Do you think, now I'm going to bring back the nurture versus nature.
Yeah.
You mentioned, which I found interesting, in the beginning we were talking about, whether you had inherited some things from your mother or your father, and, whether it's nature versus nurture. And then you specifically said that you think you get your artistic talents from her. And your son also is an artist, an incredible artist, and some of his pieces are in the background there. And now we're talking about this, you said you have an innate way of being able to overcome. Do you think that comes from, inside of you, like genetics, or was that nurtured into you?
I think it's probably a combination. I think the qualities that I have now, from what I recall and from what people have always said, I always had those qualities. And now seeing Emmett, obviously he has Down syndrome, so that adds a whole nother layer to who he is. But he has that same ability. He literally lives in the moment, and he does that in his artwork too. Like he is not thinking about anything in the past. He's not thinking about what he's going to do even later in the piece. He is like right there right now, and it just flows out of him, and that's just his view of the world every minute that he's living. So I've loved that quality. And then I recognize that I have some of that, but I'm inspired by him, because it's a whole nother level. He is literally right there right now. Nothing else. So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So you feel like you kind of have this ability to overcome. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point, did you study Buddhism?
Not technically, but I've met, my dad introduced me to yoga and sort of a Buddhist way of thinking when I was really young, so like I was doing, I was doing yoga as a young kid with him, or being introduced to it. So I think his perspective sort of was ingrained in me early. You remember John Roadhouse, my client, John Roadhouse? He's just been a huge impact on my life. He ended up starting, essentially a life coach business, but, I connected with him. Just our relationship from the second I started cutting his hair was amazing. But he studied Buddhism, and he's a lot of what he teaches in any kind of this life coach scenario is based in Buddhism. So, the ideas of the perspective of the world, and what, the compassion and really listening and really putting yourself. That's all. I learned a lot of that from John Roadhouse. So
that's interesting, because I feel like maybe that also was for you, having had that foundation when you were confronted with these accusations of racism, and wanting then to and getting past that anger stage, that you were then able, from your practice of compassion and maybe sitting still if you're practicing yoga, that you were able to then sit still, have compassion, and then start to move forward. And yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also that may work too in your advantage when you are overcoming, in this aspect of overcoming, if you're able to sit still, and then you're like, okay, what's my next move? This too shall pass, as the old Southern people say, this too shall pass. And how are you then going to pass this on to other people in your life? You said your son has it sort of intrinsically, but what about your nieces and your nephews and maybe even people that you work with? Is that something that you can pass on?
I don't know. I guess I try to. I mean, like anytime, any kind of mentorship or teaching opportunity, or just relationship building, I guess that's the quality that I hope that people are taking away from their experiences with me. And yeah, so I feel like in my small way that I hope that I'm impacting people in that way.
Yeah. Do you think that this new collection from American Crew, I mentioned that you're the global artistic director of American Crew, and I trained to be an educator for American Crew. And one of the things that I kept asking every time I would go to Colorado for the training is, when are we going to have some, Black models, and when are we going to learn how to do, like fades on Black people or Black men? And it was always like, well, that's not the focus right now. Maybe we'll get to that later. And it was really hard for me because that was something that I wanted. I loved the American Crew. As I said, that's how I came to you. I sought you out because of the teachings of American Crew. And I didn't feel belonging there. That was a place I didn't feel belonging because I couldn't see myself or my sons or, Black men in the space. And it wasn't a welcoming space for Black hair cutting. Mm-hmm. And now I think that's something I saw that American Crew has created a collection of just highly textured hair. And I'm wondering how that was for you making that pivot for American Crew.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about, kind of the lesson of white silence, right? In a lot of ways, because, you think about like some of the interactions we had where you had ideas and we were engaging and sort of, but it was like, okay, we'll get to that. But it was never, right? It was sort of a priority scenario. It wasn't, and I didn't realize what the impact that was having. I think American Crew is sort of similar. I mean, we've always intended, right? We've had conversations for years and years about highly textured hair and how, Dave and I have been talking about, obviously how amazing highly textured and how cool this collection could be, and the silhouettes and how different. But it just was never. We actually did that collection long before, before George Floyd was killed, and before, all of this became, present in our lives in the way that it is. So to do that, to finally do that collection, Anthony was involved with that, and was just, it felt amazing to finally do it. So American Crew's continued. Obviously, I don't know if you've seen some of the recent stuff, but we just finished a whole new segment and collection. There's videos. So yeah, highly textured.
I saw the one with the afro.
Mm-hmm.
The guy with the afro. So handsome.
So cool. Yeah. That will be a permanent part because, culturally how impactful and just how important it was that we do it, but also, the hair is just so beautiful, and it just broadens the world of American Crew and feels so like now we can actually be American Crew. I had an interaction with a gentleman at this show. I don't know if I told you that.
That's true.
A Black man walks up to me at the show. He's like, God, this hair, American Crew, it's awesome. Where are the Black men? How can you say that you are American Crew and represent the man and not having? I was like, oh my God. So this is that actually was a big part of the conversations that sort of went on with David and making sure that we did this, because that was alarming and eye-opening.
Wow. When did that happen?
That was probably 2-3 years. It was probably 3 years. It was the last time we did the America's Beauty show. It was one of those last shows. So
yeah. So what would you say then to people who are like angry and not accepting of it? I think that you're doing it now, and they're saying, well, it's about time, and like now you're trying to do it just because George Floyd, and just because of, everyone's doing it, and you don't want to be looking like the negative Nellies or the not turning the corner people.
Right.
Well, what would you say to that? I mean, I'm sure that's kind of an argument that people might make.
Yeah, and you would want everyone to do this authentically because they want to do it and they know it's the right thing to do and they're moving forward. But even if people just are engaging in it and just because it needs to, you know what I mean? I feel like that's a really interesting one to sit with. I feel like for us it was just, because having done the collection because we wanted to do it. I mean, I know the timing, it was perfect because we had already completed that set of images when George Floyd was murdered, and we wanted to honor that, and so we had these images ready to go. But for a lot of people, they're sort of stepping into this, and they haven't engaged. And so I guess I would say, just step into, if it's fear, whatever it is, just step into it and engage.
Yeah.
And there's just no other, we have to. There's nothing else to do.
Yeah. We are nearing the hour, and I just feel so excited. I feel like we covered so much in this, and I feel like it was really helpful for people to listen to the story of, where you came from, identity, and, coming through tumultuous situations and how you handle it. Is there anything that you could pass on to people that are listening that you think might be helpful in their journey to doing extraordinary things?
I come back to that fear because, a lot of what I've accomplished, I feel like I've had moments where I was, you're not sure if you're good enough or if you're ready to do it. But I guess just stepping into whatever there is your internal guiding light and connecting with it and moving forward with it, because ultimately you have to get out there and do it. I mean, I've had the sort of fear that I didn't create American Crew, I didn't create Art and Science, but I can take pride in the fact that I have done everything in my power to make it better and bring integrity and creativity to both those worlds.
Thank you. I think the fear aspect is huge. I feel like, most people get stuck in fear, and maybe using some of those Buddhist principles of, sitting still could help people in processing that fear and just recognizing this is where I am.
Absolutely.
And then moving forward. Yeah. Also, last thing, how can people contact you? What would you like people to know about you? Would you like them to look at your Instagram? Would you like them to look at your website for Art and Science? If people want to get to know you more, what would you send them?
Social media has not been something I've engaged with in the way that maybe perhaps I should. So I would say probably through Art and Science, through the Art and Science website. That's probably where we have our loudest voice.
And could you tell people what that website is?
Yeah, our artandsciencesalon.com, and our Instagram is the same.
Awesome. Paul Wilson, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm so grateful that you were able to fix the time situation with me and that we were able to pre-record this podcast interview and episode. And thank you so much.
Aoife Thurman, this has been an honor. Thank you.
Wow, that was a fabulous interview. I'm telling you. Sometimes I think, well, can this next podcast get any better than the previous ones? It was really great. You asked powerful and, what's the word? Insightful questions, and he rose to the occasion to answer them from who he is inside. He didn't get thrown or fear-based by the questions. And some of them were, targeted to challenge how he had to overcome his own fears and doubts and white privilege. But he answered from integrity and honesty.
Yes, I thought the same. There were so many aspects that you talked about that hit on different topics. and not just in business, but nurture versus nature. And then also just getting a chance to see him not only as a successful man, but as a man, period. So that we got a chance to see things that, you know what, we all have something in common as a person, and that's the things that we go through, and how did he deal with his challenges, and give us an aspect of, just because you are a $6 million man, that doesn't mean that you don't have the same challenges I do, and you do put your plants on one leg at a time, just like I did,
Right.
And it was like, wow. I mean, there were so many things that I was just writing things down, and I'm thinking to myself, well, when he's speaking about white privilege and the fact that, he is multiracial, and with, how can you just see the white privilege side, but like he said, it's just, he never had to deal with it. He never had to. So it was, just that aspect of saying, wow, there are just some times where people don't have to deal with the racial aspect, even if they are multiracial.
Yeah.
It was just exciting to see how he dealt with things.
His personal growth through racism, his personal growth through being confronted with racism
Yes.
was also a phenomenal aspect of his own integrity, personal growth, who he is, the solidness of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because he recognized, or because he had that great experience with his biological mom, and the great experience of his stepmother, and of course the continual the fact that his father was there throughout all of that. Sometimes when there's a divorce and then the stepmother comes in, there's some negativity there, but he didn't have that.
Right.
So he was lucky, blessed to have a continuous, good, solid, loving upbringing, and because from the age, I think he said 6 on, both parents were white. He did identify more as in a white world than in the Japanese world, but always that aspect of the Japanese culture was there, and he recognized that it was there.
Sure.
That it was in his art. But now I think he's recognizing it, not just in his art, but in who he is. Huge acknowledgement on his part. Huge acknowledgement, and recognizing that he was also guilty of white privilege.
Absolutely.
I don't want to say guilty of, but recognizing that he lived in white privilege and that maybe he needed to do something about that.
And his name in and of itself, I mean, Paul Wilson, you can't get any more, Anglo-Saxon than that,
Right. And you can't really tell that he is a mix necessarily, it's understandable that he's been treated as if he's white his entire life, because you can't really tell. So he has an interesting outlook and experience because he was raised with multiple cultures, and yet he only had one being, that's how he was treated, just as white. So that must have been an interesting thing to go through.
Yes. And the fact that he actually said, I had white privilege. He actually, he recognizes it as what culture calls it.
Right.
Is a white privilege. But, I thought that it was actually one of the things that really touched me. I was taking notes, and when he was talking about in the very beginning, he said, well, my mom taught me this, but my real mom taught me this. And he had a hard time distinguishing between the two, because naturally both of them nurtured him to where he is. And they did it in such a way that it taught him natural success.
Yeah.
And Brenda, I didn't see him having a difficult time distinguishing between the two. I thought he beautifully distinguished between the two. It blended. He'd say, well, my stepmom taught me this, my real mom or my mom taught me this. I think he could see the difference. But what you're saying is, even though there were those differences that he acknowledges, he still grew up as a white person.
Yes, and he grew up not well, and even still, just looking at that the white mom didn't treat him as though he had a cultural difference for her. She wanted success for him no matter what color he was.
Exactly.
And so she taught him that way. And then his mother, his biological mother, taught him the traditions of the successful Japanese,
Yeah.
individuals. So he had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
He said something.
And they were
for
success.
He said his both of his moms in different ways, both of his mothers in different ways, taught him how to be a leader in the world and navigate in the world. So it was interesting that he said the two women taught him that.
Yes.
The two women
I
taught him
didn't catch that.
how to be
That
a
is very
leader
cool.
and navigate in the world.
Yeah,
Yes,
that is
that
very
was,
cool.
fantastic. And then I think that him being able to be in touch with his emotions,
Yeah.
not only regarding the two women and his father, but when he was being taught by the gentleman who had taught him about hair, he was touched emotionally
Yeah.
in order to go into the world of hair. So, I mean, he's just seems like such a well-rounded man.
And another
Eva,
thing,
was it cool to work for him? Was he he seems like such a great person.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like the empathy that he has and sort of that Buddhist sort of Zen
Yeah.
personality is really great. And that was the thing that draws people to him and drew me to him. The thing that wasn't good is what he was saying was the white silence. This idea of, oh yeah, we'll get to that later. Like that's not so important. And that's what impacted me, emotionally and was debilitating in the workplace.
right?
And he
Is
also
that what caused the issue? Is that what caused what you were talking about? I'm sorry to interrupt you guys.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that was what caused the issue. It was this idea that when a person of color is saying, hey, I'm feeling something here. This isn't
Right.
Can we do X, Y, and Z? And he was there to listen. Like I said, he's empathic. He was there to listen, but then the movement never happened.
I see. So no changes were really made at that point. And so I get it.
Yeah, and then he said right at the end, towards the end, is that he said that as painful as it was necessary. So he knew that there had to be that change, not only in the workplace, but in his life as to what was priority, for himself and his business.
Yeah.
Your voice is not coming through as clearly as ours, so I don't know if you need to put your
That's true.
earbuds on or what, but we hear us clearer than we hear you.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
see if there's something.
Yeah, you're a little quiet.
But while you're fixing that, I wanted to say that another point that I wrote down that I really loved, he said, I love the happy ending for his mom. He said that his biological mom remarried a military guy. She had that structured life, which she grew up with, which she loved, and she was very happy. I think that also helped him to be happy, that his mom was happy, to be conflicted, not to feel guilty that she got left behind or something like that.
Totally. That's a good point.
Is this better? The sound coming through? Is that better?
A little better. A little bit.
Yeah.
Are you on a headset?
I'm not on a headset. I actually.
Oh, okay.
Is this better? What about this?
Yes,
That is better.
Okay.
it's getting better.
Okay. So I want to respect, people's time that are watching and allow for a little tie up and closing out of the conversation. Are there any things that you feel we should leave the viewers with in terms of the conversation that Paul and I had, or any aspects that you would like to add that would impact the viewers when they're watching?
That's a good question.
You know,
Go ahead. You go first.
Kelly, I actually, it's kind of pointed to you a little bit because I did your first reaction to what Yifa was saying during the piece when she was talking about what's happening in Texas, and they were taking Susan B. Anthony and Dr. King out of there, and you were like, "What?
What? Yeah, that's crazy to me. I didn't know that that's happening. I can't believe that."
And I actually just wanted to tie that in with what's going on is that because I mean, in the grand scheme of things and looking at the interview, this was about success, no matter who it is or what color the person is. And then number two, the nature versus nurture. But I think that what ties this in for me, and I wanted to express that regarding, Kelly, is nature versus nurture. It doesn't have a color. It has an emotion with it. It has a feeling of me being wanted to be treated just like you are treated, and your reaction showed me that you want me to be treated just like you.
Exactly.
So I want to encompass that and leave that with your viewers, Yifa, that you know what, success comes in many colors and many variations. But what is the most important thing that we should take out of this is that we're trying to nurture each other regardless, and that's our nature.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Very good point.
You guys mentioned something about fear throughout it here and there, and that kind of touched, it hit me hard because that's actually what I am struggling with right now. Is I find fear is what stops me from succeeding at anything I'm trying to accomplish. I get just paralyzed by it. And you have to push through. You have to push forward, and you have to just have faith and believe in yourself. And it's a hard thing to do sometimes. And it was cool to hear him say that, because even as successful as he is, he commented on having fear, and it was like, it was just cool to hear, very relatable. And it just kind of helped give me more perspective.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then the fact that he said, even though he had that fear, he took it as a wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
He ended by saying, if you connect with your inner guiding light in the middle of the fear, that can help you move forward in a way that brings more light to the world, to your surroundings, to not just to you, but to your whole business or your surroundings. I thought that was very, very profound. That he, as Yifa pointed out, he didn't get stuck in the fear. He acknowledged it. Well, maybe for a minute he was. He didn't stay stuck in it. He acknowledged, okay, this is not easy. This is hard. And there's fear here. But I guess because of his background, the Japanese mother and her influence, and then the Serbian mother and her influence, and the father too, that you can connect with the Buddhist training, whatever. You can connect with your inner guiding light and move through anything. That was profound.
Yeah. That was cool.
Well, thank you guys so much for participating in this watch party. For me, I really feel so blessed to be able to call on such amazing friends in my time of need. Like I said, I do feel that everyone needs to have a board of directors that they can call on for any kind of advice. And I called on my aunt to help me figure out how to pivot. And then I called on you guys to help me execute the pivoting. And I just feel so thankful and blessed to have all you friends and family members that have helped me. In 2 weeks, on August 8th, I will be interviewing Grusia Mohudin. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. She is a movement change maker, community organizer, and somatic coach. And why I think this is going to be so impactful leading up to this conversation with Paul Wilson is somatic coaches really help people to be able to work through how their feelings impact them and when they're getting stuck. So that idea of fear, what does it feel like when you're in that fear space, and how can you access that as a way to catapult you forward? So I think listening to her interview and talking about being a somatic coach will be a great tie-in to this interview with Paul Wilson. Thank you very much for being with me. Please like and subscribe, all viewers, and tune in August 8th for the next episode. Thank you so much for watching.